Welcome to the program. Today we're joined by a leader whose career sits at the intersection of digital transformations, AI innovation, and people-focused leadership. It's Richard Ellis. He's the Chief Operating Officer at Answer Digital, a UK-based consultancy renowned for driving change in financial services, healthcare, and beyond. With over 2 decades of experience in platform engineering, strategic leadership, and project delivery, Richard has helped organizations navigate the complexities of digital transformations, always with a focus on empowering the people in the organization and protecting the value of human expertise. Richard's journey includes roles as director and principal consultant at Answer Digital, where he's led teams through agile transformation, software development, the adoption of cutting-edge AI solutions. He's passionate advocate for reskilling workforces, aligning industry and education, and ensuring that technology augments rather than replaces human talent. Richard's insights on AI, digital transformation, and the changing nature of work have made him a sought-after speaker and thought leader. Today, we invite him on the show to explore his perspectives on the future of technology in the workplace, the challenges that come with adopting new technologies and reskilling a workforce, and how organizations can thrive in this era of rapid change. I thought it was important to continue this dialogue that we've now been having for years on this program, given the recent hype around AI. We're recording this program in November of 2025, so with that in mind, there's been a lot of talk in the media all around the world about huge AI investments, and we thought it was time to separate hype from reality to talk about the realistic challenges that come with new technologies being integrated into the workspace. And I think Richard's going to provide us with some very important insights from somebody who's helping companies right now adopt new technologies, and from somebody who is doing this with their own company as a chief operating officer. So it is my honor to present this conversation with Richard Ellis. Richard, thank you for joining the program.
Brian, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, so one of our goals today is to try to separate hype from reality, not just in the overall topic of digital transformation, but really in the AI space. And as we record this program in late November of 2025, anybody who's following the stock market knows how much investment is pouring into AI companies, the data centers behind them, and anything attached to this space. And the hope and the hype is that this technology will allow tremendous productivity gains and potentially even replacing some human workers and functions. I want to start our conversation today with your general view, with your extensive experience advising companies. How much of this hype do you think is real and there should be legitimate excitement for the productivity gains to come? And how much of it do you feel is overplayed and overdone?
I think I'll start by saying I think the hype is very real. I think what's not real at the moment is equality and understanding of the potential use cases for the adoption of AI. Be that in operational process, or or be it as for the want of a better phrase, a co-pilot in conducting tasks, particularly those associated with digital transformation, whether it be software engineering, whether it be code quality testing, whether it be DevOps pipeline building and deployment activities. I think there's a huge amount of scope for the use of AI. But I think at the minute, people are still a little bit unclear. I think we're in a testing phase, a qualification phase as to where the gains might best be realized. I think one of the other challenges that we face at the moment is C-suite, chief execs, chief digital information officers, chief technology officers have a mandate. There is no question, have a strategic mandate to explore AI. But again, whether that's really understood, that mandate is really understood across their organizations, I think is something that we come across quite regularly, and consequently you see very different levels of maturity and different approaches to implementation. So I think I think the hype is very real, but I think we're at the very start of the hype curve.
So let's talk about the stages of this, because I don't know if there's a direct parallel. What you hear a lot is this is sort of like the advent of the internet. It's sort of like when computer technology started to come into offices, and that took a period of time and then it became ubiquitous. Do you see this as a parallel to that, and it will take a number of years for most companies to adopt AI in a meaningful way? Do you think it'll be relatively quick? And maybe, is there a parallel in the technological space that you actually look at AI integration and AI technology and you can compare it in a similar way that it will take companies and society a similar amount of time to adopt?
Yeah, I think the speed of adoption is going to be subject to a number of constraints. I think the first one is understanding data. I think organizations, particularly, and I've worked for the past 20 years predominantly in financial services, businesses who have enterprise monolithic applications whose data strategies have developed organically over the years, currently recognize that actually there is a significant precursor of work to be done in data readiness and really understanding um, artificial intelligence readiness and how they might be able to use it, because unless that not just the data strategy, but unless the data structure, data architecture is in place that's conducive to implementing AI, I think the adoption curve will be slowed down. I think the second thing is I do think it's going to take a number of years for people's understanding and use of AI to mature. I mean, we've seen an incredible acceleration over the course of the past 6 to 9 months, but the reality is most people, commercially or privately, are using AI as a simple prompt tool. And I think we're just now starting to see the emergence of organizations that are starting to look at more agentic approaches to AI, and where the potential operational gains could be realized for example, from the automation of workflow that's currently manually processed. So I think there are three key things really. I think kind of data readiness. I think operational appetite, and I think user education. I think are the key things.
Now, it seems like each of those is a unique challenge, but user education might be the biggest challenge in that I think it's fair to say that a good portion of your organization needs to be comfortable with these tools to actually get the gains. You can roll them out, you can have the data architecture in a good place, but if your people aren't using them or using them the right way, or experimenting in a way that allows the organization to realize potentially custom use cases, the gains are going to be limited. So, how do you advise companies to approach this education piece when you may have some folks who are 6 months out of school and
Mm,
they've already used this technology, it's native to them, and you may have 30-year veterans of the company who are in executive positions who still struggle with today's technology, let alone
mm.
adopting these?
Yeah, I think, and I'll draw the parallel with my company, Answer Digital. We provide technology consulting services to domestically in the UK to predominantly public sector, our healthcare or our national health service, and then also in private sector financial services. Now, the reason I offer these two sectors is because they are highly regulated environments, and therefore the use of AI has got to be not necessarily tightly governed, but has got to be run within the context of guardrails, particularly when it comes to data security and the safe use of AI. I think, and so one of the things that we did very early was we encouraged all of our consultants to be entrepreneurial, to be exploratory, to get creative with how they use AI in their day-to-day jobs, and how they identify opportunities for the use of AI when working with clients. But one of the things that we did was we created an AI charter. We didn't necessarily want to go to a full AI policy because I think at this stage it's still quite difficult to actually be able to enforce that policy. But what it did do is accelerate us and my colleagues through an understanding of what does safe use of AI mean? What does ensuring that we're using LLMs in secure environments such that models are not taking models are not then training using the interactions that we've had with them. Equally, looking at particular tools. So we've got a significant number of software engineers in our organization. So looking at tools, GitHub Copilot is one of the first ones that we've started using in anger, and ensuring that we've effectively got guardrails around our use of it, so that whilst people can explore, we do it within the context of safety and security. I think the key things really.
Now, this has been another topic of conversation: is does AI open up a new wrinkle in cybersecurity protection and challenges? And of course, it can. And different tools that you're building those AI systems off of offer different levels of security. So as you are advising clients, and even as you think about it for your own consultancy, what are some of the big safety questions that you had going in that either you were able to put in place guardrails internally, or you
Mm.
required of the vendors that you were working with that they had in place for any AI applications?
I think one of the first one, and it will be, I say one of the first, but it will persist, is understanding data storage and data usage in interaction with large language models. Um, Certainly, one of the things that we looked at very quickly was potential security concerns around ChatGPT, for example, as an LLM, and making sure that we were able to establish um, the, a more secure approach to the use of Gemini, particularly just um, uh, in prompt creation and use and transcription and what have you. So working within an enterprise subscription with Google, we know that our data is secure, it's managed, it's ring fenced, and we're not going to be exposing any potential exposing data either unnecessarily or at risk. Again, I think organizations like us, and we've actually just been through our Cyber Essentials Plus certification. So we look on an annual basis at the security posture of us as a business, both for our business and in the work that we do with our customers, and how we manage infrastructure, for example, and how we have policy and process that's set up to make sure that we and our customers are operating safely and securely. Um, and I think this is something that companies are going to have to prioritize. I think things like cybersecurity certification, not necessarily an easy process to work through for all companies, but certainly something that establishing good, robust policy, good, robust procedure, ensuring everybody in an organization has an awareness of not just the security posture of the organization, but why we've shaped it as we have. Yeah, I think that's key.
So let's talk about data for a moment, because obviously all of the AI advancements and technology are built off of both the data and the way that you have it stored within your organization, and then the data is publicly available.
Yep.
But for many organizations to unlock the true value, it would need access to some of your proprietary data and potentially some of your intellectual property. And you've talked about making sure that that doesn't make it out
Mm,
into the world. But for a lot of companies, I mean, this is really the crown jewels of those organizations. And some of the best gains they might be able to achieve would be having that intellectual property engaging, or that proprietary information engaging with the AI system to unlock efficiencies, to unlock answers for engineering organizations or for scientific organizations, helping problem solve. But there has
mhm,
been this hesitation about allowing the system to interact with data that is truly proprietary to your organization and potentially, intellectual property, for fear of that being accessed. Is that a legitimate concern if you're working with one of the large established companies, let's say OpenAI or Google?
mhm.
Or do you have confidence that those companies have put in place the proper guardrails to ensure that that level of data breach or that level of privacy is in place, and companies big or small should feel confident working with at least the big three or four players?
Mm. I think it's quite a complex area. I think it's a really good question, and I do think it's pretty multifaceted. I think from a technology perspective, um, I think we are seeing a level of pressure being put on the major kind of, like you say, the two or three, maybe three or four big AI technology providers, because people are going to be more forensically using their services, and the use cases for the use of their services are going to be extending all the time. So I do think there is an innate pressure on those organizations to provide secure approaches to the use and deployment, not just of AI models, but of the data that they're consuming. Uh, do I feel like there's a consistency? Look, speaking perfectly candidly, do I feel like I've completely bridged the trust gap? I think probably not as it stands now, and I think having a healthy level of skepticism at this stage is probably not a bad thing. We have to ensure that all decisions that we're taking at the moment, we're taking a good risk-based approach to those decisions, and I think that's something that consumers are going to have to do, good consumers are going to have to do, for the foreseeable future. At the same time, I think we're still only really at the advent of legal position on this as well. I think really understanding your own particular context, be it one that's subject to regulatory compliance or otherwise, or equally one in which, to your point, you have proprietary data or software and systems that could benefit from interaction with AI. You're going to have to take good legal decisions as well, because there's unquestionably there are going to be areas where uh, recourse will or won't be pursued, and I think at the moment when we haven't really seen how that's going to develop.
So I'm curious, as you're consulting with clients and even as you develop your own counsel for your company, what role does your legal team play in helping you guide these discussions about which organizations or enterprise solutions to work with, and to start, because there isn't a lot of case law on this, right? It's not
Mm.
like there's established 25 years of here's what happens when there's a dispute. So, do you actively engage the legal teams for your clients? Do you have a legal team that is helping answer these questions with or for you, or is this something that really is outside expertise, and you wouldn't necessarily have an in-house attorney who'd even be able to guide these conversations?
Yeah, we don't currently have in-house legal capability, so we do work with legal partners. One of the reasons why I made reference to the legal point was because we're actively working through, what could the implications for our master services agreements be with our clients, and what do we need to think in terms of data protection, data processing, and what that means within the UK concept of GDPR, which is maintaining data protection. So I think understanding what the flow down of contracts looks like is going to be important, particularly obviously from a liability perspective, if there is any breach or release of data or proprietary IP. But I think we're certainly still fairly early in that. Yeah.
And can you walk us through your, at least how you think about it when an AI tool is developing something net new? So taking all of your data and then coming up with recommendations or coming up with efficiencies. As far as I'd be concerned, that's my proprietary solution. And let's say it does come up with a new product, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I would want the ownership of that. But is there any potential dispute that if a large language model built off of ChatGPT or some other solution,
Yeah.
or even if it was a vendor's solution, that they have some ownership over that because it was their tool, not your intellectual capability that developed it? I mean, is this a gray area, or is this not been explored yet?
I think Uh, I take a slightly different lens to it. I think one of the things that the question assumes is that if there's data or a product that's produced by proxy of AI, that it's a complete product. And I think one of the things that we're talking about a lot at the moment is the continuing necessity for having the human in the loop, so to speak. From our software engineer, and I speak about this, but we're talking about it actively at the moment. We're very encouraging of software engineers, quality assurance engineers, platform engineers in using AI, as a supplement to their work. But actually, the eye for quality, the eye for refinement, the understanding of what's being produced by the AI, has to be that of the engineer. And I think that obviously what that does create is a very grey area because you have some IP that could have been created by an AI model, and that could have been contributed to or complemented by the human in the loop. So at that point, there's almost a split ownership of the content that's produced. But again, I think we are still very early in this curve. I think that will be worked out. But I think and I would want to emphasise that point. One of the things that we talk about a lot, both internally as a business answer and with our customers, is this nascent fear that AI is going to replace people, and almost that lack of certainty or that uncertainty that supports that. That contributes just as significantly to the hype cycle as the emergency of the technology itself. And certainly I think we as consultants in the digital transformation space, there is just as much importance, not just in the product, in the output of what you create when you're working with customers, regardless of their context. There's just as much in the understanding, the human understanding of organizational, political, technological relationship, um, political context that comes with the nature of the work that we do, that actually, whilst AI might provide a tool to develop efficiency, the real core skills of what brings success to, for example, digital transformation projects is for me not AI. It will still be the value of the person and what that person can bring.
So that brings us to the next sort of element of this, which is the ROI, how companies invest, because implementing AI is not free. Some of this is licensing costs, some of it is human costs of training, some of it is resources you need to bring in, consultancies you need to bring in,
Hmm.
and companies want to have a sense of what that return on those investments would be. The initial hype was, well, this is great. Once we're done with this, we can, reduce our headcount by 10%. We're going to be vastly more efficient with the remaining 90%. We'll measure it that way. And then as you begin to look at where the technology is today and over the next, let's say, 12 to 24 months, not all of those efficiencies are necessarily going to be there over the next 4 or 6 or 8 quarters. Some of those efficiencies will be gained over a longer time horizon. So, how do you advise your consultant in your consultancy and with your businesses? How do you advise them to think about the return on an investment made today in AI and how to measure it in a realistic way that justifies both the cost and the time expense that goes into the implementation?
I I think it's another really great question. I think so. One of the things that we do a lot as a business is we work with companies to implement change. And over the years, we've lent fairly heavily on Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup. And the Lean Startup offers the premise of the minimum viable product. And the minimum viable product is um, essentially the minimum amount of work you can do to test a hypothesis or an assumption. So at the moment, I think we're very much in a break. And at the point where you test it, you learn from, the test that you've just run. You learn from it, and then you either pivot or you persevere. I think where we're at the moment is running these fairly. I think any expectation that you're going to be able to look at an enterprise organization and say we're able to extrapolate a return on investment beyond anything that's actually a fairly small implementation that you can test, learn from, and start to build a data set that you can then extrapolate, say, okay, well, we might be able to see operational savings of X or Y. I think we're just too far away from that at the moment. I think equally, if organizations were starting to make decisions right now based on the return of investment that AI might bring, I do fear that we could be making decisions that are not necessarily evidence based, because I do think we're still very early in the adoption cycle. So I think there's a real challenge there. My recommendation when working with organizations, whether they're more mature enterprise organizations or whether they're startup businesses, is looking at how can you start to adopt at a fairly small scale. How can you then iterate? How can you learn from that adoption? And once you start to build that evidence set, that data set, then one, it's going to give you direction to where else you can potentially implement AI to the benefit of the organization, and two, how you can more effectively model the benefits of AI.
Is there any other technological innovation, let's say in the last 20 or 30 years, that ultimately was an enterprise level solution and it became such an important part of business process that it became an essential part of the expense? That no matter what, you had to have these licenses. Let's say Microsoft was a good example for
Yeah.
many companies. Um, do you think that there's a parallel example that AI is going to follow where some or all of these tools will become so essential that they don't necessarily require an ROI justification? They are just a cost of doing business and a requirement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the adoption of cloud compute and cloud technology, I think, is one of the absolutely key ones. the ability um, to deploy and scale infrastructure at the speed, at the speed that we now see, the ability to knit together different cloud tooling that gives you a level of speed, of efficiency that arguably the business case is it's a mandate to have cloud computing in place in order to ensure that you've got systems that can scale, that can perform, that are interoperable, and that are secure. So I would definitely say my mind immediately went to I think we're in the middle of the dot-com boom. We're seeing that all over again. Uh, but I think the more recent example, and the one I would probably draw the parallel with, is the emergence, rapid maturity, and then whole scale adoption of cloud computing.
Which actually happens so quickly. A lot of people who are not in IT departments or don't spend a lot of time thinking about it don't realize when it started, how quickly it
Yeah,
was adopted, and
yeah,
it was an expense, right? This was not free. Companies had to spend real capital to adopt cloud computing, and in the
yeah.
end, it became the standard.
I agreed, and I think at the same time that one of the things that we saw was, I mean, look, you can't look past, the Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud Services. The speed with which these organizations made the provision of these services commercially viable was also, I mean, it was advantageous for the market and everybody that operated in it, but it was a very necessary move. But um, I think what they recognised was with the emergence and adoption of these technologies, the barrier to entry had to be lowered very, very quickly, because in and of itself it would prevent the adoption of the tools, and I think everybody could see the benefit of the adoption of these tools. And the reason why I offer that is because obviously the processing power that's associated with AI at the moment is astronomical. And I think certainly some of whether it's OpenAI or Google with Gemini, I think without question there are going to be rapid advancements in how we can more commercially and environmentally. Let's be clear, and environmentally, how we can better serve the demand that is only going to continue to explode. There's no way it's going away now. I think yeah, it's going to be really interesting to watch over the coming months.
So that was going to be my next question on the business model of this, right? So there are some technologies where you have a low cost, relatively low barrier to entry for most companies just to get them familiar with your tool, your technology, almost a free trial model, right? And then once you become an integral part of that organization's processes and their business, then you start to raise the fees, right? And
Yeah.
over time, you start to claw back maybe some of the productivity gains or the expense costs that the company experienced by implementing your solution, and now you're going to pay it out to the vendor. Do you think that's a possibility with these large enterprise solutions, that they start low cost to get companies on board and then the costs rapidly rise so that these companies can become profitable? After all, we know how much is being poured into from an investment standpoint, many of these companies.
Mm.
Or do you think it'll be more of the cloud computing model where there's some of that, but the adoption is so broad and so wide that the cost per user is relatively reasonable?
Uh, my honest answer, it could go either way. I guess. I think um, and having given my response to the previous question, I think right now I'm minded that it's probably the latter. Um, the only challenge I've got to that is that the the grip that these I referred to one of your previous questions around companies, companies or organisations or perception of the safety and security of the models they are interacting. We're very unlikely, and I could be absolutely wrong, but in my relative naivety, I think it's going to be unlikely that we're going to see plethora emergence of large language model providers, because I think those that have stolen a march on the market now, and those who are being invested in with incredible sums, I think the footprint they're going to have is one of safety and security, and I think that's going to make it difficult for other entrants to come into the market and offer the same level of security and safety, uh, challenging a lower price point. So I've kind of not necessarily a clear answer. I think where I'm at is I'd love to see that it's commercially and environmentally economical for people to continue to adopt and use AI models. Do I think the big few could potentially see this as commercial advantage? Possibly, but then it really does. To my point there, it really does depend on how the market develops and how providers start to emerge or fall away equally. There are some cloud compute providers that, were there at the beginning that certainly aren't there now. So it will be very interesting to see how the market develops.
So let's think about now what effect this has on the average worker.
Yeah,
There's plenty of fear, plenty of concern in the market that over the next 10 years, large numbers of white collar jobs are going to simply disappear because the AI models will get good enough to achieve things like legal work, basic financial work and accounting, some low level work in, let's say, even software development.
yeah,
That these tools will be better than the average human at doing this work, and so companies will turn to them to do so. Um, Now, we've heard some outliers, some tech evangelists who will say, well, 80% of those jobs can be wiped out in the next 10 years. And then others have said, on the margins, maybe 5 to 10%, and everybody else will become a lot more efficient. And the truth is probably somewhere in between.
yeah,
For the average worker out there who doesn't necessarily understand all of this, but they're thinking about their future, they're thinking about their career. Are there some professions that you feel pretty confident at this point they're probably not going to continue at an entry level, and folks who are younger who have time to retrain should start doing so? And are there others that you hear people talking about that they could be replaced, but realistically, you don't think that technology will be able to replace the human element, whether it's judgment, interpretation, or
yeah.
other things that are uniquely human?
I mean, look, there's a very obvious answer. I suppose fairly low skilled administrative type processes could very easily be replaced. You could very foreseeably see AI replacing. But again, I like to look at this through, and maybe it's maybe it's the, I don't know, the eternal optimist, the idiot optimist in me. I'm not sure which. I'll let you make a judgment on that. I think all jobs are going to be exposed to a level of change. I don't necessarily like to look at it that there are some jobs that will be completely, replaced or eradicated. I think there are jobs that, to a much greater extent than others, will be made much lighter touch from the human in the loop, and we'll see much more automation because people will want to see, process optimization, process efficiencies delivered through the use of these tools. But then, conversation I have a lot at the moment, particularly with people in the project management community, for example, who, are kind of unclear at the moment as to what AI could do. I really challenge them, and that's people in our own business and people with whom we work, to really lean into let's for argument's sake say 25% of a manager's role, or the tasks that a project manager delivers, could be automated. Well, how is that 25% going to be reinvested in time that is valuable, either to the successful outcome of a project, or to, the continuation of or the further building of a relationship with team members, or with clients? I think I really do think, we're, look at, but I completely understand and empathize that people who don't necessarily have a level of proximity to the emergence of AI, and therefore, there's a fear factor to it. I do understand it, but I would encourage everybody and anybody on the maturity curve to just look at it as there is going to be a level of complement that it can bring, supplement that it can bring, that's going to give me the time and the capacity, whether that's purely from an efficiency perspective, or it could be, from an emotional investment perspective, that I can then reinvest elsewhere in the job that
Now, as you advise companies on this kind of conversation about introducing AI to their workforce, for
I do.
example, there is a natural gut reaction given what's in the news, I think, from a lot of companies that a lot of individuals will interpret that as, oh gosh, they're coming for my job. and that if anything, that by evangelizing it, you might be creating more anxiety in the organization, which might create some pushback from really doing what you want them to do, which is adopt the tools, test them
Mm.
out, find the efficiencies. So do you see that happening, and do you see that as a real concern? Or do you feel like people are interacting with these tools so much in their everyday life outside of work that they're sort of expecting their job is going to adopt it, and they're not pushing back on it. They're trying to find a way to make it work for them.
I think that's a really, I think the latter point there is a really, really good one. Um, if we think about things like cloud compute, the adoption of cloud computing, only a relatively small percentage of people really understood what was happening, really understood its application, really understood its potential. What the emergence of things like ChatGPT and OpenAI being available to anybody and everybody, via a smartphone, has allowed people to, to explore, to test, to understand much more quickly. And I think, that's going to really educate people with regards to, how they could potentially use it to do their own jobs better, how it could affect, the outlook of their job, or the breadth of their role. So I think everybody is, I think everybody is on a process of education, or on a path of education rather. I think for me, um, key thing is advocacy. And I say advocacy because, myself as a 20-year consultant, one of the key things that I've come to recognise is any kind of change, be it organisational, be it technological, will only be successful if there is a level of advocacy for the why something is being done. So going back to the Eric Ries model of build, measure, learn, and starting small, testing early, one of the benefits that approach gives you is that it almost de-risks adoption for people, because it's not a wholesale change. It's change that is within the bounds of a particular hypothesis, or we're going to do something. We're going to do something to test something, to learn something. Doing that, and accepting not only your ability to measure what you've just done, but actually being quite open to failing, and recognizing that it isn't going to work all the time, and actually, there is a huge amount of evolution still to come. I think that will build pockets of advocacy. And the minute you get those pockets of advocacy, a more broad or more wholesale adoption or change is much, much easier in organizations. I think there's a real uncertainty at the moment, actually, around the impact of organizational culture, the impact on organizational culture. What does, does interaction between us change? Does what does it mean to work on technology projects going forwards? Actually, I think it's enormously exciting, if I'm honest.
So, do you think that there's going to be a difference between the large companies that are able to spend a huge amount of capital to experiment and test and learn, and they'll be working with, in many cases, the AI providers to find these use cases? And it will give them an overwhelming advantage over the small businesses who may only be able to use the basically individual commercial level availability. They might not be able to afford the enterprise solutions for these AI tools. Does this create a situation where the largest companies get the biggest benefit and the smallest companies are going to get left behind? Or do you think there's enough flexibility, I suppose is the word, in these solutions that an industrious medium to small size company can get just as many efficiencies as
Yeah.
the biggest financial services provider in the world?
I think that's absolutely the case. I go back to the very start of our conversation. I think one of the key considerations at the moment is, some of the huge enterprise organizations, the largest financial companies in the world, they have such a legacy of technology. They've got such a legacy of operation. They've got such a legacy of people, that actually, uh, whilst they may be able to leverage huge investment, and they may be able to leverage relationships with the providers, actually, there's the small medium enterprise, small and medium businesses actually don't have the technical debt that some of these other, for want of a better phrase, they don't have the technical debt or the legacy debt that some of these other entities have, and therefore they can be more agile, they can be more nimble, they can make decisions that maybe, are slightly more are slightly less risk averse than some of the larger organizations, and consequently they could be, slightly more innovative with their use of it. So I think I'm not necessarily sure there's going to be an inequality in kind of competition. I think actually it's just going to make it much more nuanced. I think.
So as we look to the future now, in the last couple minutes we have together here, I want to ask you two questions for the average listener who's listened to us talk for the last half hour or so, and they say, "Okay, love it. We agree with all of it." Small business owner, or maybe a high-ranking leader in a company, what should I be doing today that I'm not doing now? I've subscribed to these tools. I've deployed them to my team. I'm asking people to experiment. I'm organizing my data. I'm doing all of the fundamentals. But what should I be thinking about? What questions should I be asking today to prepare my business for the next 6 to 12 months of innovation and opportunity in this space? And maybe to the point of, what do you challenge your clients on when they come to you and they have these digital transformation aspirations? How do you challenge them to ensure they're ready to make the change that they say they're pursuing?
I think you've just nailed it with that very final sentence. I think there's we have to abstract the appetite for AI adoption with the readiness for AI adoption. And regardless of whether you're C-suite in an enterprise organization or you're an entrepreneur in a small medium business, you've got to be looking at your technology estate and understanding, is there actually preparatory work that I need to be doing and time and money that I need to invest here such that we can effectively adopt these tools? Because returning to your point earlier about return on investment, the risk that we run at the moment is people, they invest sums of money in estates, in technology ecosystems that actually aren't themselves ready for the adoption of AI. So I think that has to be an imperative, and that's why we're doing that a lot with companies at the moment. Actually, recognizing that there absolutely is the appetite, but we are able to overlay a technological lens on that and give some real insight into, okay, well, that's the target, but to get to that target state, we're going to have to do these two or three things first. And I think that just comes back to, good decision making, prudent investment decision making. Um, yeah, I think that's one of the things that I'd be looking to focus on. The second thing, and I return to the AI guardrails or the AI policy. I think there's very little in terms of legislation that's currently out there, and legislation protect will protect consumers, it will protect technology providers, it will protect professional services entities that operate in that technology environment. At the moment, in the absence of really kind of clearly defined and adopted policy, as in governmental or government legislation, I think being pragmatic about the safe use of AI, I think, is really, really key. I think constantly challenging, do we understand where our data is going? Do we understand how our data is being consumed? What level of risk exposure from a cyber perspective is this placing upon us? How do I ensure that our people are using it in a ethically responsible way? These again are absolute priorities that particularly with regards to the ethical priority. That's not a technological concept. That's still very much the human in the loop. Um, so yeah, those are the things that we really are talking about.
So then my last question for you would be, looking into your crystal ball, looking towards the future. If you were in front of a university class, 21, 22 year olds, they're coming up on graduation, maybe they're going to go to graduate school, and they ask you, what do I need to be prepared for as I get into the professional world? And it's going to look different than anything that we've seen before. And you're in a position that you're advising businesses and you kind of understand where they're going. What are the skills that people should be investing in, irregardless of how everything plays out with AI specifically? But you kind of have a sense of where the technology arc is going and what the valuable human in the loop skill is going to be. What would you be advising those students to be investing in outside of their core studies, maybe in their personal time, to develop into a person that companies will want alongside this technology?
I think again a really interesting question. And before I get to my answer proper, one of the things that we've, as an organisation, have done over the past 10, 11 years is operate what we refer to as academies. So we are professional services IT consultants. Um, traditionally there's been a view that to become a consultant you have to have got a certain level of experience of expertise, and we really wanted to challenge that going back approximately 10 years. And one of the things that we looked at first was, could we take somebody who'd got, for example, a computer science degree, a UK computer science degree, and could we accelerate them through initially then 6 months of hands-on learning, such that rather than it taking a number of years to get the skills and the experience to become a consultant, within 6 months you're doing the job. And we did that. And over the course of the past decade, not only have we refined that down to 3 months typically for people who we can bring in to our organization, but we've done it across software engineering, we've done it across quality assurance, DevOps, project management, indeed, and business analysis. Now, the reason that I say that is because we challenge ourselves constantly to look at, how can we all never stand still, to coin the phrase? How can we all, make sure that we're continuing to prioritize time on our own learning? How do we, we make sure that we're horizon scanning in the right way? That means, we've got an awareness of what's coming down the line. Now, the reason I give you that is because we, we've uh, we've made the decision to evolve the academies further. So in the start of Q1 2026, we're going to be running two concurrent academies. One of which is the Technology Academy, where we're going to be bringing people through a 3 month or 3 to 4 month process where we'll be upskilling in all of the technical skills that I mentioned earlier: software engineering, quality assurance, DevOps, so on. And equally, then concurrently, a non-technical academy, which is going to be looking at agile project management, agile project management, business analysis, kind of core consulting skills, product ownership. And the thing that became very clear, or has become very clear over the course of the past 2 to 3 months, as we've designed these academies, is we need to make sure that we're teaching people how to write great prompts. We need to make sure that we're teaching people, how to get the best from AI as it currently stands. If the most simple use case is, I'm going to interact with ChatGPT. I'm going to ask it some questions to help me create some content. Okay, well, how do we do that really effectively? How do we make sure that the human in the loop is driving the AI and the AI is not driving the human? Um, and I think that would be my advice to. I mean, don't get me wrong. If I did find myself stood in front of a group of students, I would feel very deeply for that group of students. But I think, I think really prior or really understanding the role and the influence you can play in your interaction with technology, because the technology is not going to stand still. The acceleration is going to be profound from here on out. Even we talk about the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months, where we could be in the next 5 years right now. The mind really does baffle. So I think, be inquisitive, be exploratory, understand, but really understand. Don't blindly use or adopt technology. Understand firstly what's the why for you using that technology. If you have a why for using it, then explore around it. I think that would be my advice.
Yeah, in some ways, I think that this is it's a complicated moment. I think if you're a young person entering the workforce, but all of our experiences have been that the younger you are, the faster you adapt technology and the more innovation you find in it. And it may actually be the people who've been in the workforce 25 plus years who struggle to adopt as quickly. And so we spend a lot of time worrying about the young folks, and justifiably so, if entry level jobs start to dry up. But this is generally the generation that adopts the fastest, and they may surprise us with how quickly they adapt.
I couldn't agree more fervently. As a father to young children, seeing my children growing up as absolute digital natives, and the speed with which they understand technology, they use technology, it really is quite incredible. So I couldn't agree more strongly. I think you're right. I think the future's in good hands, providing that those hands use technology safely.
An optimistic note to wrap on. Richard,
Yeah,
you've been generous with your time today. If people would like to learn more about you or your company, what's a great way for them to find more information?
So our company is Answer Digital. We're a Leeds-based, so UK Leeds-based digital consulting business. We are available on www.answerdigital.com. Our website gives a good overview of not just the work we do, but who we are as a group of people. We're very, very passionate about our community, about the people that work in our business. We are indeed an employee-owned business, so everybody in our company has a real vested interest, not just in the work they do, but in the outcomes that we can deliver for the people with whom we work. I'm available on LinkedIn, and yeah, I would be more than happy to chat to anybody that took the time to reach out.
Excellent. We will post links to that in the description of this program. Richard, thank you so much for taking some time to speak with our audience.
Brian, thank you. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you.
One of the very first topics that I covered on this program, in offering simply an initial perspective, was artificial intelligence, because I understood even 3 years ago, as we started this journey on this program, I understood it was going to change a lot. I understood the potential that these tools and services had for individuals and for businesses, and I knew that it was a technology that was going to fundamentally change the way we work. But let's think about what I just said there. It was 3 years ago that I offered my first opinion on what it could mean to have artificial intelligence as a more regular part of our daily lives, with tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, Cloud, and others that all of us, for a relatively low or no cost, can interact with to make ourselves more efficient in our personal lives. That was 3 years ago. So in 3 years' time, we have seen the adoption. We've seen software vendors integrate some of these automation solutions. We've all played around with it. And many of us are finding good use cases and nice efficiencies. And the world is a bit different now. We're able to interact in a different way with technology. We're able to be more efficient. We're able to auto-generate email messages and meeting notes and light imagery. And we can play around with animations and help our imagination bring things to life that we don't have the skills to do ourselves. And the business world is quickly adopting these tools to offer new products to customers, to offer more and deeper insights into their own data systems, and to solve complex problems. And we're only at the tip of the iceberg. But again, it took us 3 years from the first time that I talked about this on the program to the conversation we were able to have with Richard Ellis. I simply want to share this perspective so that we can all understand that technology innovations, they do happen relatively quickly over the long arc of human history, but they tend to feel like they take a while in the moment themselves. And so for anybody who is, first of all, afraid of the technology that's still to come, this has not passed you by. We are in the middle of, and if anything, as Richard said in the interview, we're in the early stages of AI exploration and adoption. It has not passed you by. There's a lot of opportunity to learn this tool, learn these technologies. And in fact, I don't think anybody's doing it perfectly today. So get on the train. Test out these tools and solutions. Think about them in your own personal life as well as how they can make you more efficient in the workplace. But for all leaders of all companies, I would urge a moment of breathtaking. Literally take a breath, because there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of enthusiasm and there's a lot of interest and there's a huge amount of investment going into all of the aspects of the AI revolution. But do not expect those returns to be immediate. Do not expect a 6-month or a 9-month return. If you're a publicly traded company, don't expect to see all the AI savings pop up in a quarterly earnings report for whatever those are worth. These are going to be investments that pay off over years. They will show productivity gains in surprising ways that might be hard to measure in the early days. But it's not like this is a technology that will all of a sudden reach a point where there's mass adoption and all of the jobs that used to be done in-house by humans disappear all overnight. This is going to be a slow evolution that takes time, and years down the road, AI will be so integrated into all of our tools, systems, and processes that we'll barely notice it, much like computers are ubiquitous in an office today. But that transition doesn't happen overnight. It does take time. The payoffs take even more time. And I do think there's an awful lot of hype. Remember what I said 3 years ago, and I encourage you to go back and listen to those words, because I was just a lay person sitting back thinking about how I would use these technologies and how I think they might be beneficial. And I said at the time, I didn't really think AI would be able to replace a lot of human functions, but I believed AI would be able to supplement us and allow all of us to have our own little personal secretary, personal digital secretary, to do all of the things for us that executives have their administrative assistants do for them. And it will allow all of us to be more productive, to use our talents and resources to their best ends and not do a bunch of busy work. And I think AI has proven out to do that well. But I had always said that there was going to be a real challenge in replacing what humans do that's uniquely human. And that's our creativity, and that's our ingenuity, and that is our ability to adapt to each other as emotional creatures, not logical creatures. And I still think that holds true all these years later. The thing that makes us different than a machine is the emotion. It's not the logic. What AI will be able to do very well for us is to think through problems, to find logical solutions, to unstick ourselves from problems that our brains are having a hard time computing. But it doesn't necessarily bring that solution into human application. And that's what makes us different, what makes us unique. And I don't think there's any AI system today that has much of an emotional brain to it. The other element that I wanted to highlight out of all of this is it's natural for there to be optimism about the future and the efficiencies that can be gained. But the term human in the loop is now one you've heard on multiple episodes about AI. We heard it in our conversation around military applications, and we've heard it today with Richard in a business context. And if you go into other conversations we've had elements of that, whether it's talking about healthcare or other spaces, that there's always got to be a human in the loop to check the work of the AI agent. So this human in the loop process of decision making means that people still need to be an important part of controlling the AI so that the AI solutions don't control us. And that's the key to understanding where the efficiencies will be. It is going to make the people that we have more productive, and it will replace some of the lower value work that humans do today, but not most of it, because there will need to continue to be that human in the loop, if only to ensure quality, to ensure ethical usage, to ensure proper application, to ensure privacy protections. There will still need to be people with their hands driving this technology, but it will allow us to do more with less, which is what our societies around the world have always needed and will need. My last point is to simply say, since this podcast in particular was focused more on the entrepreneurs and the business leaders, to some degree regulators, but for those of you out there who are leading businesses or you're in a decision-making position with businesses, I simply ask you to consider two things about the practical applications of AI and what you're hearing in the hype and what you're seeing in the reality. Number one, do not get sucked into the idea that the technologies that you're signing up for today will cost the same in the future as they do now, and do not assume that the costs are going to come down. It is very possible, if not likely, that there will only be one or two big winners in the AI race. And it's hard to know today who those will be, but it's likely that there's only going to be a couple of solutions, which means competitive pricing will probably not be a factor. This may end up in a near monopoly, and we don't know that for sure. This could end up in an ecosystem with a dozen solutions. But if it goes the way of cloud computing, or if it goes the way of office solutions and tools, there's probably going to end up being one or two, maybe three big winners, and they're going to be able to control the market and corner it in a way that is unhealthy for competition and pricing. So whatever you're paying today for your AI licenses, assume you're going to be paying a lot more in the future as the smaller competitors fall out. The other thing I would encourage you to consider is that none of these solutions will mean a hill of beans if you do not bring your employee base along and incentivize them to use these solutions to make themselves more productive. Now, over the long term, that may result in net job reductions. Maybe you don't need to add as many headcount. But the idea that you're going to be able to replace 20% of your workforce and achieve some great savings and implement a much cheaper AI solution, if that's the right thing for your business, so be it. But do not position that as a cost savings, because within 2 to 3 years, it is highly likely that the very AI licenses and softwares and solutions that you use to replace those people will end up costing your company more than the total headcount of the people who were doing those jobs before. Because I can assure you that if you work for an AI company, you understand the value of your tools and technologies, you're going to eventually start counting it against the price that companies pay for people to do those same jobs. And you're simply going to ask companies to take that same money that they were paying people, and now you pay it to us, the software provider. In the same way that pharmaceutical companies in the United States price their drugs by thinking about how much it would have cost to manage this disease in the absence of this drug. So now simply take 80% of those funds and steer it towards the pharma company. It doesn't create a savings, it just creates a diversion where the money goes somewhere else, but it doesn't get saved. Do not assume that this is a mass efficiency gain that will allow companies in the short term to become 50% more efficient with the dollars that they have to hire fewer people. What's more likely is that you become more productive per employee, and in that way, you might be able to generate more revenue per employee. But the idea that you can just eliminate 10 to 15% of your workforce and save instantly in that way, you might be able to in the short term, but those gains will be quickly wiped away by the increasing cost of maintaining your AI solutions and the subscription fees that are going to go through the roof. There have been hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, actually now billions of dollars of investment into these solutions, and those investors expect a return. And the only way that I can see for them to achieve that return is to have an extremely high price point for enterprise solutions, the companies that are most capable of paying those fees. Because they're not going to get them generally from individuals, except in a few fringe cases. But they know businesses and governments are where the money is. And that's where they're going to go to find their profits. And they have to find them, or the whole system falls apart and all the investments go to zero. So there's a lot of red flags, a lot of things to be mindful of as we go through this cycle, but also a lot of optimism. And I'll simply reemphasize as we close the show today, the point that Richard made and that I made at the end of the interview. This is a dilemma for those of us who are a little bit older and are thinking about how to adapt our lives for AI. But for the younger generation, for younger people, for folks in school now, whether they're in elementary school, secondary school, they're maybe in college, they're digital natives. They're going to adopt this technology rapidly, and they are going to bring solutions that we never thought possible, and they're going to build entire businesses and ecosystems around it. So we should be concerned about young people for a whole variety of reasons, but I would not be concerned about them for the technology. They've always been early adopters. They've always found ways to make the tech work for them. We probably should be a little more concerned about those executives who did not grow up with this tool, don't understand how to use most of it, and are going to be lapped very quickly by their kids and by the youngsters in their companies who know how to use the technology but might not have the strategic vision to get the most out of it. Marrying those two things together will be when society gets the biggest benefit. But for right now, I wouldn't be too concerned about the next generation. I think they're going to be teaching all of us the true value of these tools, and I believe they'll do it in an ethical and safe way that advances human experience, doesn't detract from it. If you enjoyed this program, I encourage you to share it with your network of friends, coworkers, colleagues, your professional network. This is meant to be a program that expands our minds and expands our knowledge base. I hope we accomplished that here today, but we can only grow if you share. So please do share this. Subscribe if you're listening to us on any of your favorite podcast platforms or on YouTube. That ensures that you're the first to know when we launch new episodes or clips, preview clips of episodes that we've already published or are still to come. And you can always reach out to me directly. Find me on any of your favorite social media platforms. I'm at Brian J. Matos. You can also find me on YouTube, Just search the Brian J. Matos podcast, and you can reach me directly at info@brianjmatos.com. Look forward to talking to you again very soon with our next episode. And in the meantime, I hope and encourage you all to stay curious.